So I'll begin with the chapter. I'll just read the last verse of the second chapter. It says, "Then I will sow her for myself in the earth," making reference to the name Yisrael or Yisrael, which means Elohim sows. So then I will sow her for myself in the earth, and I will have mercy on her who had not obtained mercy. Then I will say to those who were not my people, you are my people, and they shall say, you are my Elohim. Also making reference to the names that Yahweh had told Hoshea to give to his children. So Yahweh promising that in the future he would once again accept Israel as his people. Once again, Israel would receive mercy and finally would be sowed on the land of Israel, the promised land, forever. Now, continuing with the third chapter, which is very short, it says, "Then Yahweh said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover and is committing adultery, just like the love of Yahweh for the children of Israel, who look to other Elohim and love the raisin cakes of the pagans." These raisin cakes were done for the queen of heaven, as seen in the book of Jeremiah. The queen of heaven, who is nowadays worshipped still, except through the name Mary. Of course, different religions will worship the same entity with other names, but Mary is the most common name used by the so-called Queen of Heaven nowadays. And there was the custom also of making raisin cakes in Catholicism for Mary, which we see it comes from way back. So once again we see that the Almighty asks of the prophet to do something that most people would find wrong or bad, I don't know, either to complain against Yahweh for doing such a thing, or for these things being written in scriptures, or some would see it as a contradiction from other parts of scriptures, not understanding the role of the prophet. The role of the prophet is to become an example for the people of that which Yahweh is saying, relating to them. So Yahweh makes the prophet go through certain experiences in order for him to know what Yahweh, a little bit of course, is feeling, and therefore he can relay that through experience to those around him. Also, it acts as a prophetical act in which, by the prophet marrying a woman like this, who loves another man, Hoshea will know what it is for Yahweh to have Israel who loves other Elohim. And by doing so, he's also leaving an image in this reality of that which Yahweh is experiencing in heaven. So that's also a way in which everything that is in heaven fulfills on earth, and vice versa. So then Yahweh said to me, go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover. Here, let me see the Hebrew. So, and he said, Yahweh to me, once again, take for yourself a loved woman who is loved by a friend. So that could be either a friend of Hoshea or a friend of hers. which makes obviously more sense with the context, since Yahweh is the only Elohim. And of course, those who are rebelling from the angels against him are not on his level, and if they are rebels, then they are not friends of his. Therefore, it would be Hoshea marrying a woman who loves a friend of hers and is loved by another man. Then it says, go and love a woman who is loved by a friend and is committing adultery. The simple fact of loving another person while being married to someone else is a sin, because that will lead the person to have thoughts, ideas, and words towards that person that would end up in adultery, or would be adultery in the mind or in the heart. So, and of course, I'm talking about that type of love, of that like that of a couple, not the other types of love that we do know. So what I mean is the one in a marriage. So, go again, love a woman who is loved by a lover and is committing adultery, just like the love of Yahweh for the children of Yisrael, who look to other Elohim and love the raisin cakes of the pagans. So I already explained what those cakes were and why they are mentioned, but not only are they mentioned because of the physical aspect, but because of the spiritual also. Remember that the harlot, who is the queen of heaven, the whore of Babylon, as found in Revelation, she uses the wine of her fornication to fool the nations, and that is idolatry. So from her grapes she gets a wine, a teaching that leads people astray, away from the true doctrine, from the truth, Yahushua HaMashiach. So raisins obviously are the ones, are grapes which are dried, and they would make cakes, and then they will obviously eat them. So therefore confirms the idea of the doctrine, because the doctrine is mainly represented by food. When we learn of scriptures, we are feeding our soul, and that causes us to rejoice and have life, which is connected to the wine. So grapes, also from the vine, represent the people of Israel. The vine is also the true vine, is Yahushua HaMashiach. That's why true Israelites are connected to him. And like I already said, the cakes regarding, having to do with the doctrine, because they would eat these raisin cakes in honor of the Queen of Heaven. So they would eat the doctrine, the false doctrine of idolatry coming from the grapes of the whore of Babylon. Hope that's clear. Then it says, so I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver. So I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver, and 1.5 homers of barley. Both silver and barley are representations of the many. As I have explained in many other studies, there are two groups that will enter the kingdom through different gates, pretty much. One gate is narrow, the other one is the opposite, so many will go through it. So there are few and many who will enter the kingdom, yet in different ways. Few who will not have to experience death, and many who will have to go through death in order to be able to enter the kingdom after resurrection. Here is talking about those who are the many who do not love the true doctrine, so they are not eating the bread of life. Instead, they are eating raisin cakes, which is the doctrine of the whore of Babylon, in whatever false doctrine they may be. So, because Christians came from Catholics, so there's a lot of connection in the doctrine. And even though Christians tried to get away from Catholicism because of all the falsehood within it, they didn't go away enough, and that's why they are turning back to it, and that's why they never lost all the falsehood, just part of it, and then added some other during the years in which the church has existed. So here's talking about the many. Just like gold represents the few, silver represents the many. Just like wheat represents the few, barley represents the many. So that's why it's talking about a woman who loves another one, and that's it, and who eats another doctrine. So those people who claim to believe in Yahweh, who claim to be married to the Almighty, yet they do not read scriptures. Instead, they just listen to the false doctrine given by their priests who claim to be talking from scriptures, and they believe, so they continue. And they worship or love a different name, therefore different entity. So they claim that they love the Almighty, but they think that the Almighty is a different entity. So I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver, and 1.5 homers of barley. Uh, 15 is the numerical value of the name Yah. Well, the first half of Yahweh, Yah, is Yud-Hey, numerical value 15. So he bought her for himself, and he represents Yah. So that's why the number, among other things, of course, 15 shekels of silver. Also, remember that Yahushua was sold for 30 pieces, and obviously 15 is half of it, as showing this being part or half of the congregation, half of the people who will enter, the many, the other part, the few. So that's why Yahweh would appear twice, also another reason. So I bought her for myself for 15 shekels of silver, and 1.5 homers of barley. Yahweh, as well as the last, Yahweh appears on earth to become one with his people, or to make his people become one with him through his Messiah. And 1.5 homers of barley. So 2.5. I would like, let me see something in Hebrew. Alright. It says, and I bought her for myself with 15 silver. Then a homer of barley, yeah, and a half. So yeah, 1.5. So 1.5 of barley. Yeah, I was reading it wrong when I said 1 and 1.5. It was 1 and 1/2. Also 1.5. I don't know why they write so much words. So 1.5 homers of barley. And I said to her, you shall stay with me many days. You shall not play the harlot, nor shall you have a man. So too will I be toward you. The idea of Yahweh with his people is for his people to be with him forever, many days. And for his people not to play the harlot, which they did by going after the idols. Nor shall you have a man, for her man would be Hoshea, just as Israel's husband would be Yahweh, as he himself said it, that in those days the people would call him Ishi, not Baali, meaning the people would call him my husband, not my Lord, because Yahweh does not want us to call him Lord, for that is a name of Satan according to scriptures. Baal, Lord in English. So, and I said to her, you shall stay with me many days, you shall not play the harlot, nor shall you have a man. So too will I be toward you. So Yahweh is telling his people, I will do the same. I won't get another people. I won't go after other nations. I will just protect you, love you, and be faithful to you. And like I said, his nation, his true nation, are those who are connected to Yahushua, those who believe in Mashiach, in what he did, and obviously act according to what he said. So, verse 4, for the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince. So just as the previous verse said, you shall stay with me many days. Now it says, for the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince. Because after the kingdom fell, after Shlomo, it wasn't the same ever again. So that means that there were only two real kings in Israel, the way Yahweh wanted it, and not even because Shlomo did wrong. So only one, David, and a half, like the barley. 1.5, like all of David's life, and then half of Shlomo's life. And after those days, the kingdom would be split. It would split up in those of the north and those of the south, Israel and Yehudah. The kings of Israel would do wrong, then Yehudah joined and started doing wrong also. So even though there were kingdoms in Israel, they were not from Yahweh because they were worshiping Moloch, Baal, Kium, and other false Elohim. After years and years, the Greeks come, take over, then the Romans come, take over, and they place their own king. So they placed Herod, for instance, who it is believed that he was a son of Asaph, an Edomite who became a Jew, who converted, and became the king of the Yahudim in that time. Yet, even during the time of Yahushua's life, around the time when he was 10 years old, it is believed that it was around that time that the Romans took away the power or authority from the Yahudim to execute people according to the law, meaning according to the Torah, when it says that the priest must order someone to be killed because he killed somebody, for instance. That authority was taken from them when Yahushua was still a child, which was prophesied in Genesis 49 when talking of the tribe of Yehudah, of how they will lose the authority, the kingship, true kingship. So even though there was a king in Yehudah in the time of Yahushua when he was to be sacrificed, the authority was not in them to kill Yahushua. That's why they had to go to Pilate. They had to go to Rome for Rome to be the one who would execute Yahushua. So, when Yahushua came, the kingship was taken from the Yahudim. And there have been 2,000 years from that moment. And that is many days, of course. So it says, for the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince. Let me see the word that he uses there for prince, it says, for many days, because for many days will the sons of Israel live or be without a melech, ve'ein sar, without a prince, as Michael is called in the book of Daniel. Sar Hasarim, the prince of princes, the prince who would become the melech, the king, after he appears and fulfills the will of Yahweh. So, for the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar. As we know, the first temple was destroyed by the Babylonians. Then when Yahweh freed the people from Babylon 70 years later, through Cyrus, he ordered the temple to be built again. So the second temple, even though some call it Herod's temple because it was destroyed during that time, it actually would be Cyrus or Zerubbabel's or other names way before Herod. So the second temple was built, was not as beautiful as the previous one, yet spiritually represented way more. And Yahushua comes during the time of the second temple, 40 years after his death. The Romans destroyed the temple, and once again, for 1,930 years, around that, more, because Yahushua would have died on the year 30, then 40 years later, the year 70, so only 4 years I will have to take from the 2000, that would be 1,960 years, around that, since the temple was destroyed. And I say around because we do not know exactly in which year of the true calendar we are. We'll know pretty soon, but so far we're not sure. So it says, for the children of Israel shall abide many days without king or prince, without sacrifice or sacred pillar. Without sacrifice or sacred pillar, without ephod or teraphim, meaning without a connection to the heavens, and obviously mainly without all the physical things that they would use to connect with the Almighty. When they rejected Messiah, those connections didn't work. It's as if you disconnect the telephone, but you keep trying to use the telephone, and it is not even connected to any line or anything. So they had the material, the physical things, but they didn't work anymore because the spirit had been taken away from them because they rejected it by rejecting the Messiah, in whom that spirit was in living. So without sacrifice, sacred pillar, without ephod or teraphim. Afterward, the children of Israel shall return and seek Yahweh their Elohim and David their king. One thing regarding the sacrifice and sacred pillar, as always, Yahweh uses two things, sometimes twice, as in this case, sacrifice or sacred pillar, first and last. Yahushua came to be sacrificed as the lamb for our sins, so that the last could become the set apart pillar, the king who will stand built on top of the cornerstone, the foundation, Yahushua HaMashiach. Then ephod, which is to connect with the Spirit, as Yahushua make the connection with the Father through his sacrifice, for us to speak to the Father and receive forgiveness of sins and the answer to our prayers in the name of Yahushua. And teraphim were a type of idol that would speak, because there was a spirit within that idol, and there are two types of teraphim, but one of them was the head of a corpse would go through a ritual. Well, they will embalm it, of course, and they would put a a plaque of metal under the tongue with the name of the demon that they would worship or God, and that entity would use the human head to speak to the person worshiping that head. Those were the type of idols that Laban had when he went after Jacob. That's why Rachel had to take them away, because they would speak to him and tell him where he was. So Laban went to his house. He didn't see his idols, his teraphim. So he went to the neighbor and used his. And that's how he found out where Jacob was. So here he's saying Yahweh, that Yahweh would cut all connections to him because they rejected the main connection, the one way to him. So sacrifice and pillar as first and last, ephod and teraphim first and last, because the last comes as the voice, to be the head of the congregation who will speak the words of Yahweh. So ephod and teraphim first and last, and I'm just speaking about what they represent and the reason why they are being mentioned. Yahweh is pretty much telling them that they will lose all connection to him by telling us that it would be because of rejecting the first and last, the two connections that he actually sent. So verse 5, afterward the children of Israel shall return and seek Yahweh their Elohim and David their king. This is huge, because just like I was saying, first and last, two things. He says Yahweh their Elohim and David their king. The way for us to seek Yahweh our Elohim is through Yahushua, our belief in the first. And the teaching of the first will be given by the last, who comes as a prince, who becomes a king. And according to Judaism, is David himself being reincarnated. But even if we don't want to take that from Judaism, Yahweh is clearly speaking that it is David. So it is either a reincarnation or the actual fulfillment of him whom David was supposed to represent, meaning the last, the one who would become the king of Israel. He was represented by the main king of Israel, the only one who fulfilled Yahweh's will all the way till the end, David, who also is called, his name means loved one. He's the loved one, beloved. So that connects with the thing that it said earlier about choosing a wife who loved a friend. But then Yahweh, when he forgives his people, he will put as their king, as their husband, the one who is beloved. And they will finally love Yahweh through Yahushua in the presence of the last. So afterward the children of Israel shall return and seek Yahweh their Elohim and David their king. They shall fear Yahweh and his goodness in the latter days, first and last, because the beginning of wisdom is the fear of Yahweh, and Yahushua came to give us wisdom. So through our fear of Yahweh, we accept Yahushua and receive wisdom. And then it says in his goodness, as the goodness that comes from the last, meaning from Yahweh through the last in the end times. So during the second coming, the goodness of Yahweh will be given to those who were waiting for it, those who are seeking his presence. But in the latter days, as he himself is saying right here, they shall fear Yahweh and his goodness in the latter days. So that's how the chapter ends. I'm going to see if there are any questions. Guess I'm going to give a minute for questions. And I'll be right back. All right, I see a couple well, I guess it's one question. It says, can we say that the many and the few are represented by the division of the kingdom north and south? Yes. Also, why are the north tribes called Ephraim? Is this correct? Yes, it is correct. And they're called that for a couple reasons. One, because they represent the many. And Ephraim means fruitful, double share or double in size. So Ephraim is a term that Yahweh uses to speak to the north kingdom, which is that of Israel, because they would represent the many in the end times, and that is the meaning of the name. But not only that, because of the meaning of the name, Yahweh promised Ephraim, and because of their actions, of course, that they would be multiplied by a lot in relation to the rest of the tribes. That made so that Ephraim would fill all the tribes pretty much. So they would be so many that there would be people from Ephraim almost anywhere. So that's the point. That's the reason why Yahweh started calling the tribe of Israel, which are 10 tribes, Ephraim, because Ephraim was so huge that he was pretty much as the 10 tribes and was in the middle of those 10 tribes. And in the end times, most of the many would be from Ephraim. Ephraim was born to Joseph while he was in Egypt. So that represents the many who are in the nations thinking they are Gentiles, because Ephraim was born to Joseph with his Egyptian wife. Although according to certain writings, that wife of his was actually the fruit of the rape that Shechem, the prince of Shechem, did with Dinah, the daughter of Jacob. So the prince of Shechem raped Dinah, and the fruit of that relation was the child who would become eventually the wife of Joseph. That is according to some. So that would make her half of Israel, half Israelite. But still, the fact that Torah doesn't say that explicitly shows that Ephraim represents Gentiles who became Israel, because they were born to a Gentile woman, church, congregation, yet through Joseph, in the end times, they become part of the congregation of Yahweh. But the many. That's why Yahweh gives Ephraim that name to Israel, because how many they were, how they filled the nations, how they would be in the end times, most from Ephraim, and how they would think they were Gentiles, or some of them would be Gentiles, yet through Yahushua would become Israelites. There's another point regarding that is important. In Revelation 7, if you read the tribes that are mentioned as the chosen few, you don't read the tribe of Ephraim. You read the tribe of Joseph. Normally in scriptures, Joseph and Ephraim are interchangeable. The reason for it is that the last would come from Ephraim, who came from Joseph. So the last is as Joseph. That's why he comes from Ephraim. He comes out of the many to become the leader of the few, to bring the few from the many, pretty much. So the descendant of Joseph would come from Ephraim, but Joseph is the one that represents the few. Ephraim represents the many. The two shares that Ephraim also means, the double share, the double mantle that we see also in Isaiah 42 for the last, for the few and the many, the two flocks that the last has to come for. So in the tribe that we see in Revelation 7, we read the tribe of Joseph, not the tribe of Ephraim, because Joseph represents the few. So those of Ephraim who become of the chosen few will be called Joseph, not Ephraim. because the name Ephraim represents the many. And that's why in Revelation 7 still, after we see the 12 tribes, Yahweh starts talking about the many, the multitude, the great multitude. Those would be represented by the name Ephraim. Hope that clarified your question. Then you said, I know it means fruitful, but was there a time where the 10 tribes became Ephraim? I'm not sure I understand that part. I mean, scripture calls Israel Ephraim, even though not all Israel came from Ephraim, but since most of them did, that's why the name also fits. That's pretty much the point. But it's not like the other tribes disappeared or died and only Ephraim was left. Not like that. Hope that's clear. I don't see any more questions.